Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan. He's a Redemptorist Priest and a lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union. We had a very interesting discussion last week, Father, about the encyclical, Pope Francis' encyclical, and laid the groundwork for where it came from. What's the first, perhaps when you read it, what was the first impression you got from it and the purpose of it?
The overriding concern for him is how do we respond to the global situation, the process of globalisation where we're in at the moment, with some 2 billion or more people suffering some degree of hunger or malnutrition, with the results of that stunting.
Yes.
Children, and all the diseases that follow on from poor nutrition.
Yes.
So that you get a higher death rate and so on. So there's the extraordinary poverty on one side, and yet the extraordinary richness of our economy at the moment, where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very few people.
Yes.
So even in the United States, where you have 1%, the wealth concentrated in the hands of the 1%, whereas most of the ordinary people, their income hasn't risen for 30 years. You know, it's an astonishing situation for us. Now he's saying we don't want that model of capitalism to become universal, because then we've got vast difference between rich and poor, and particularly what's making this even more urgent is the environmental crisis. So he's saying, look, we've got to take this on board. How do we move forward? How do we resolve all these difficult issues? So he puts numbers of these, looks at numbers of these issues, and then as he goes through the list of things we're really struggling with at the moment, he takes, well, how does this look in the Christian tradition?
Yes.
What have we learnt about the scriptures, the life of Jesus, and the other Christian movements and non-Christian movements as well? How do we as a world move forward? So this is not a specifically Christian. Right at the end, he's got a prayer that Christians can say, and then he's got another prayer that people of all religions or of no religion can say.
Right.
So what he's saying, he's trying to reach out, is saying, look, this is not a Catholic thing. This is a survival thing for the human race now. And what is God concerned about? He's committed to human well-being. The whole planet we're part of the planet. We're part of nature. And we're pushing it into a crisis.
So, all right. I've got some points here. Perhaps we could go through these. This is from the Washington Post. I don't know how neutral otherwise that is, but there's 10 points here which they raise in which relation to the encyclical, and I just wonder if I could raise those with you and you discuss them from your knowledge. The first one they put at the top is, and you pretty much answered this, is the climate change has grave implications. And just, I quote from it, each year sees a disappearance of thousands of plants and animal species, which we will never know, which our children will never see, because they're lost forever. Now that goes into what you're saying, doesn't it?
It does. It's part of the picture. The larger picture is what's going to happen with the greenhouse gas thing, with rising temperatures. Parts of there are modelling of what's likely to happen, but parts of the world, like Australia, like Africa, parts of the Middle East, and the United States, will dry out.
Yes.
So this means food production will become much more difficult at a time when we're expecting 2 billion more people before well, this is what we were expecting,
Yes.
until populations will level out at about 9.5 billion.
Yes.
But now the latest estimates are that population will rise after that to about 11.2 billion
Good
before
heavens.
it starts to level out.
Yes.
So what this means is the food crisis has become much more pressing than we're expecting.
Yes.
Couple this with global warming, change of climate, not just places drying out, but more extreme events,
Events, yes.
hurricanes, floods. So all this is going to make it more difficult to rising sea levels. What does that mean? It means hundreds of millions of people will have to move from Bangladesh, for instance.
Yes.
And there'll be flooding of the major deltas, the rivers where a lot of the food production is done. So this is a very, very grave situation we're facing.
Yes, that's right, isn't it? Because the deltas, there is a huge amount of food produced in those. So if they're flooded, particularly with seawater, it's good night.
Yes, yes.
Yes, as you speak, I think we get enough publicity about this that we all have an awareness of this, but the Pope has really grabbed a hold of this and is throwing a big stone in the pond.
Yes. So what he's trying to do is to put the moral weight of the church behind this concern and say, look, stop dragging your feet, everybody. This is a really major issue for us. The whole future of our countries and the shaping of civilization will depend on this. Where the next generation will look back to us and say, gee, they handled that well, or weren't they terrible? They neglected to look ahead.
Yes, more or less. And I could take one of the points they raise here about the fact of, and this is a quote from the Pope again, is from the encyclical, must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. That's pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yes, yes, but it's been deep in our culture, and even in the Christian tradition it's been deep. What he's saying now, look, it's not a matter of domineering, it's a matter of being responsible. The creation is entrusted to our care.
Living with, yes. Yes, that's amazing. We'll go to a break and we'll come back and have a further talk. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan. He's a lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union. And we're talking about the papal encyclical. One of the points that was raised by, and we must thank the Washington Post for doing this and taking the quotes out, saves us. He's talking about importance of safe drinkable water, and Pope Francis has made this short, succinct statement. It is a basic and universal human right to drink potable water. That has massive implications for this lower strata of people, doesn't it?
Well, not just the lower strata, it's affecting whole countries, like the Middle East at the moment, a heat wave we've just seen, many people dying, astronomical temperatures never experienced before, large numbers of people dying of the heat stress. So this is something quite new in its extremity. But it's also, this is part of the UN Millennium Development Goals, or now the Sustainable Development Goals that they've developed, or at the moment, towards the end of the year, will sign on to the new goals. And this is part of the Pope's support for this effort. He's talking, like Jeffrey Sachs is one of the architects of it, the Millennium Development Goals, one of the key people. So, and the Millennium Development Goals didn't achieve what it hoped for with the drinking water. No. It had fabulous results for lowering the death rate of children, of infants, and maternal death rate. Yes. So it had a lot, and it's improved the level of nutrition for big numbers of people. But on drinking water, it's really struggled. So that's going to be another big focus of this.
Yeah, there's a school of thought that the next wars will be called the water wars.
Yes, yes.
That's not too abstract, is it, when you think about it?
No. It's a worry, and particularly think of the Himalayas. If they lose a lot of their snow cover, that's going to affect the flow of big rivers like the Ganges and into China as well.
Absolutely.
So this is going to have very big implications.
Yes, and the retreat of glaciers is also an issue.
Yes.
Yes, it'd be nice if we could find something bright to talk about, but there's nothing bright there.
Not there, but actually this was one of the criticisms one of the people made, that it was a very negative and gloomy document. And I thought, I didn't get that impression. So I went back and reread it, and I think what he'd done was just take he was so upset about things he disagreed with, he read it as a whole gloomy thing. But the Pope doesn't intend that. He says we can look also at this as a moment of a great act of solidarity of human beings among themselves. He's looking at very hopeful terms, that we can, if we get our talking together and working out practical ways, we can resolve this. Yes. So he's very insistent on practical action. He keeps saying, not ideas, action. And part of his background is he comes out of what they call the Young Christian Worker movement, which had a little methodology. It used to work in factories. It had here in Australia as well. A little cell would form. They would discuss their situation, they would evaluate it in the light of the scriptures, which he's done in this encyclical, and then action comes out of it. So he's very insistent. You don't stop with the reflection. You've got to move to action. And this document is all about, what can we do about it? And he says the first thing we need to do is talk about it and really work at this, encourage the science, listen to the scientists, be guided what they're saying, and support them in their efforts. And then what he's trying to do is to say we need a mass movement of people, a social movement, which really swings behind this very carefully all over the world, with the support of the Muslims, the Hindus, people in China, all Christian groups, all even the traditional religions as well, which resonate very strongly with what his message here.
Yes.
About connecting with nature and reverencing nature and seeing it as a gift from God for us, treating it as a gift, not treating it as something we can trash, but something we need to look after and care for and make it available to the next generation.
And this is going to be empowered by a youth movement. As a lecturer, you're speaking to relatively young people. What's the general response from your students to the encyclical?
When I'm talking with younger groups, you can see their eyes light up, and you can see the pennies starting to drop. Not just about the climate issues, but the relationship between what is the God thing about, and this is real life. This is what's happening. And once they made the connection that God has invested himself in our Christian belief totally in human well-being. That's what salvation, redemption means. And there's a whole process of, we believe in the resurrection, the God's Spirit is alive and well in the world and still moving us and helping us and moving us forward to really deal with this. So I think that is critical for people to make that connection. If they see the religious thing as sort of airy-fairy floating away somewhere, unreal, forget it.
It's out, yes, absolutely. And I think that ties back, as mentioned before, into the whole Indigenous wholeness awareness, this beingness. I always remember stories that I've done some work with Indigenous people as well, and there was always a story was that if Aborigines dug a hole in the ground to do something, they would always fill it. Because it wasn't there when they arrived, and they didn't want it to be there when they left. At that sort of level, when they see what we do, goodness gracious me, it's population control. And this is a quote again to that effect, where Pope Francis says, "In the face of the so-called culture of death, the family is the heart of the culture of life, and since everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion. Now, we're just out of time, so we'll pick up that very small topic when we return. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Fr Bruce Duncan, lecturer at the Yarra Theological Union, and we just finished the last segment by asking this very small question about which related to abortion. Perhaps if I could go back and take that quote again, and this is in relation to population control and its effect on the poor. And the quote is that in the face of the so-called culture of death, the family is the heart of the culture of life. And since everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion. That's a big statement.
Yes, he's very strong on a part of human life. It is the beginnings of a human life, so it needs to be our protection as well. But and some people thought, well, it's necessary for, like in Japan, it's very abortion is very big. It's necessary to control population that way. So it raises the bigger question of what does he stand on population. This is one of the critics, criticism of encyclical, that he really sidestepped it. Now, he didn't actually sidestep it too much. I think I can understand what's happening here. This is on the agenda for the Synod of Bishops in October.
Yes. And
what he wants, what he's asked the bishops to do in preparation for this synod is to consult with their people very widely in all their dioceses and parishes and groups, and to try to collect the responses and be informed by what the people are doing. What is he doing here? He's testing the practice of the church against the experience of the people.
Okay.
He wants to say, look, we need a less rules and regulation sort of church, but one that recognises more the experience. Where is the good that people are looking for? Yes. How do we discern this good, and how do we live it out more fully? So what he is saying is on the population, referring back to the population issue, it will come up at the synod as well. But the formal teaching of a church is not to... The church is not encouraging a bigger population.
No.
And what he said when he was coming back in the plane from was it Latin America? It was headed... Catholics don't have to breed like rabbits. Terrible, terrible heading. He didn't actually use those words.
I'm sure
but he said, look, you have to be sensible about the number of children you have. And it is the formal teaching of a church that you have the number of children which you responsibly can raise and educate and care for in the light of your circumstances.
Yes.
He thought about 3 would be enough.
Yes. Yes.
So, it's not have as many children as you can. And there's a sort of a funny prejudice that this is church teaching. It's not. So he's saying, yes, Catholics need to have responsible parenthood. Yeah. And in the light of all this material he's talking about, the difficulty with global warming, the rising population, then it becomes more imperative for couples in making their decisions. He's saying this is a decision for the couples freely to make themselves in their own conscience, not to be imposed on by a government, as it is in some countries like China.
Yes.
Says, but think of the circumstances in which you're having your children. If you're in a country terribly impoverished, are you required to have 7 or 8 children? He's saying, no, you're not. And you need to be sensible about this. So I think what he will encourage, but he wants to do it through the synod, not to sort of impose it himself, to emerge from a synod. The church needs to be more involved in restraining population growth where it is too too pressing and too large for the country to cope with.
Yes.
So,
Well,
particularly in Africa.
Well, one of the interesting things with population, of course, is that, as you'd be well aware, India jumps to mind, is that as people become more economically stable, particularly women taking on home work, etc.,
Yes.
the population goes down. Their desire to have more children. So with education goes up, and the population goes down because they no longer have 8 or 10 kids for their peasant farm. They maybe have two or three. So that ties into the Pope's emphasis on a more equitable sharing of the wealth and benefits.
Yes, certainly. It's one factor among others. It's unclear how much influence the church would have in these countries, even the nominally Catholic, because the cultural pressures are so strong.
Yes.
That you're expected to have 7 or 8 children, and the more you have, the more prestige you get in a particular culture. So it's more complex than just church saying something.
It's massively complex, and then you've got issues like a selection of gender,
Yes.
Which is horrific. But he actually gender difference. Valuing one's own body in its femininity or masculinity is necessary if I'm going to be able to recognise myself in an encounter with someone else who is different.
Yes, yes.
That's a big, because that encapsulates also the issue of homosexuality and other components. We're going to talk about this again. We'll carry on in some future weeks. What would be up to the point we've come to now? What would be some summarising comment in relation to the encyclical as far as we've gone now? The power of it. What's your principal feeling of the power of the encyclical?
I wish you'd asked me a very easy question. I think we have to wait and see, to see what sort of response it really has. But certainly what will happen is that in the Catholic Church, but hopefully more broadly through all the churches and some of the other religious groups, they'll all be carrying this message out through their congregations, in their preaching, in their catechesis, and in the schools, in the whole network of organisations will say, look, let's come together as a world now for remembering that God is profoundly concerned about our human well-being. Couldn't
be better. Thank you, Father. We're out of time, and you will come back at some later time and talk
Certainly
to us.
be very happy to. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Norm.
You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. We'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Shanti Om Allahu